I used to think our greatest trials were behind us, but it turns out they were just beginning. My name is Helena, and at 62 years old, I thought I had seen it all. I've been a nurse for over 30 years, caring for others through their most vulnerable moments. Little did I know, my own life was to be turned upside down. Mom. I don't know how you do it, Martha said, shaking her head in admiration. Working those long shifts at the hospital and still coming home to a clean house and a hot meal. Dad's been such a rock, taking care of everything on the home front. I smiled warmly at my daughter, feeling a surge of gratitude for my husband, Roy. After retiring from his engineering job a few years ago, he had insisted on managing our household so I could focus on my nursing career. Your father has been a godsend, I agreed. I'm not sure I could have kept up this pace without his support. Little did I know, those words would soon come back to haunt me. Later that evening, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone pinged with a notification from our bank. Unusual activity on our account. Frowning, I opened the app, fully expecting it to be a false alarm or a simple mistake. Roy handled all our finances these days, so I hadn't really paid close attention to the statements in quite some time. But as I scrolled through the transactions, my heart began to race. Luxury hotel bookings, expensive restaurant charges, lavish purchases from high-end boutiques, all on dates when Roy claimed to be out volunteering or running errands. Suddenly, his frequent absences from home took on a more sinister hue. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just treating himself after years of hard work and sacrifice. But the dates, the amounts, the patterns, it all pointed to something more insidious. A sickening realization began to take root. My husband, the man I had trusted implicitly for over 40 years, might be betraying me in the cruelest way imaginable. I sat on the edge of our bed, clutching my phone, as a kaleidoscope of emotions swirled within me. Anger, hurt, disbelief, and a creeping sense of determination. I refused to be just another statistic, another woman discarded and disrespected in her later years. No, I would not confront Roy directly. Not yet. I needed proof, a solid foundation to stand on before I made my move. With trembling hands, I began documenting every suspicious transaction, every unexplained absence. This was just the beginning, but I would get to the bottom of this, no matter how painful the truth might be. One way or another, I would regain control of my life. Roy might have thought he could take advantage of my trust, but he was about to learn just how resilient and resourceful this 62-year-old nurse could be. The next day, I met my dear friend Linda for lunch, as we did every few weeks. Linda and I had been nurses together for years, bonding over the shared challenges and triumphs of our demanding careers. "So how's everything going with you and Jim?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual despite the turmoil brewing inside me. Linda's face lit up with a warm smile. "Oh, it's been wonderful. We're actually planning a little anniversary getaway next month. Jim surprised me with a reservation at that fancy resort up in the mountains. You know, the one with the spa and the incredible views." My heart skipped a beat as she described the very same luxury hotel I had seen charged to our account on a weekend when Roy claimed to be volunteering at the local shelter. I forced a smile, nodding along as Linda gushed about the romantic trip. "That sounds just lovely," I managed to say, my mind racing. "You two deserve some quality time together after all these years." As Linda continued chatting, I found it increasingly difficult to focus on her words. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed made my stomach churn. Roy's frequent absences, the unexplained charges, the fancy hotel getaway, it all pointed to one inescapable conclusion. My husband was having an affair. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment to collect my thoughts. In the privacy of the stall, I allowed the tears to flow, my body shaking with a potent mix of heartbreak and rage. How could he do this to me, to our family, after everything we'd been through together? But even as the pain threatened to consume me, a steely resolve took root. I would not be a victim in this story. Roy might have thought he could deceive me, but he was gravely mistaken. I would gather the evidence, make a plan, and when the time was right, I would strike back with a vengeance he never saw coming. Splashing some water on my face, I took a deep breath and rejoined Linda, putting on my best poker face. I couldn't let on that anything was amiss, not until I had everything in place. For now, I would play along, all the while plotting my next move. Over the following weeks, I became a master of deception, matching Roy's lies with my own carefully crafted facade. Whenever he mentioned his volunteer nights, I would simply nod and smile, and making no indication that I suspected the truth. All the while, I was meticulously documenting his movements, tracking his expenditures, and gathering the proof I would need to bring his house of cards crashing down. The more I uncovered, the angrier I became, not just at Roy, but at myself for being so blind, for trusting him so completely. But that anger fueled my determination. I was done being the naive, trusting wife. It was time to show Roy and the world just how strong and resilient this 62-year-old woman could be. With each passing day, the evidence against Roy mounted, and my determination grew stronger. I knew I needed irrefutable proof of his betrayal before I could take any decisive action. So one morning, I called in sick to the hospital and set my plan in motion. I tracked Roy's movements from the moment he left the house, maintaining a safe distance to avoid detection. He went about his usual routine, running errands and grabbing lunch at a local diner, giving no outward indication that anything was amiss. But I knew better than to let my guard down. Finally, in the early evening, Roy's car pulled into the parking lot of an upscale restaurant in the city's affluent district. My heart pounded as I watched him exit the vehicle and straighten his jacket, clearly preparing for a special occasion. This had to be it, the moment I had been dreading, yet simultaneously longing for. Slipping into the restaurant through a side entrance, I found a secluded spot where I could observe without being seen. And there he was, my husband of over 40 years, greeting a strikingly beautiful woman with a warm embrace. The way they held each other, the familiarity of their movements, left no doubt in my mind. This was Roy's mistress. I felt the air leave my lungs as a tidal wave of emotions crashed over me. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak, it was all I could do to remain composed and focused on my mission. Steadying my trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and began snapping photos, documenting the intimate interactions between Roy and his lover. As they were seated at their table, I studied the woman's face, committing every detail to memory. She couldn't have been more than 45, with long, chestnut hair and a radiant smile that seemed to captivate Roy completely. I watched, sickened, as he gazed at her with an adoration I hadn't seen from him in years. The hours ticked by excruciatingly slowly as they lingered over their meal, laughing and touching in ways that made my stomach churn. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they rose to leave, sharing one last passionate kiss before parting ways. I followed at a safe distance, my mind racing with 1,000 unanswered questions and a burning desire for vengeance. Once Roy returned home, I retreated to my car, the weight of the evening's revelations threatening to crush me. But even as the tears streamed down my face, I refused to surrender to despair. No, this was merely the first step in my quest for justice. With a steadying breath, I reviewed the damning photos, letting the evidence of Roy's deceit fuel the fire burning within me. He might have thought he could carry on this sordid affair indefinitely, but he was gravely mistaken. I was just getting started. From that moment on, there was no turning back. I would uncover every last detail of Roy's betrayal, gathering the ammunition I needed to bring his world crashing down around him. He had made the grave error of underestimating me, and he would soon learn just how devastating the consequences could be. With the damning evidence of Roy's affair burning a hole in my pocket, I knew I needed to take the next step. I couldn't do this alone, not only for emotional support, but to ensure I covered all my bases legally and financially. This was a battle I intended to win. I reached out to my younger sister, Patricia, a retired teacher whose wisdom and level-headedness had always been a guiding force in my life. We met for coffee at a quiet cafe, and as soon as she saw my face, she knew something was terribly wrong. "Helena, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, her brow furrowed with concern. Taking a deep breath, I laid everything out for her. The suspicious charges, the luxury getaways, and finally the incriminating photos of Roy with his mistress. Patricia's eyes widened in disbelief as the truth sank in. "That lying, cheating snake," she hissed, her usual calm demeanor giving way to righteous anger on my behalf. "After everything you've done for him, for your family?" I nodded, fighting back tears as the weight of Roy's betrayal threatened to crush me once more. I don't know how long this has been going on, or how deep the deception runs, but I can't confront him yet, not until I have an airtight plan in place. Patricia reached across the table, taking my hand in hers with a reassuring squeeze. You're doing the right thing, sis. That bastard doesn't deserve a woman like you. We'll take him for everything he's worth, and then some. Over the next few weeks, Patricia became my co-conspirator, my rock in the storm of turmoil that had upended my life. Together, we strategized, considering every possible angle and outcome. We knew there would be fallout, both emotionally and financially, but our primary concern was protecting my career and ensuring Martha's life wasn't disrupted more than necessary. With Patricia's guidance, I began meticulously documenting every shred of evidence against Roy, from bank statements to phone records. I also reached out to an old friend, Caroline, whose savvy business acumen and extensive connections would prove invaluable in the battles to come. Don't worry, Helena, Caroline assured me during one of our clandestine meetings. We'll make sure you get everything you're entitled to, and then some. Roy won't know what hit him. As the pieces fell into place, I felt a sense of empowerment slowly replacing the despair that had threatened to consume me. Roy might have thought he could discard me like yesterday's trash, but he was sorely mistaken. I was a woman reborn, fueled by a burning desire for justice and retribution. No more would I be the meek, trusting wife, blindly following her husband's lead. From now on, I would be the master of my own destiny, and Roy would pay dearly for his transgressions. With Patricia and my friends by my side, I was ready to wage war, and I didn't intend to lose. With Patricia and Caroline's support, I began laying the groundwork for my grand exit strategy. Every move had to be calculated, every contingency accounted for. Roy couldn't be allowed to gain the upper hand, not for a single moment. At home, I maintained a careful facade of normalcy, greeting Roy with a warm smile and engaging in our usual routines. All the while, I was slowly packing away essentials, organizing important documents, and transferring what assets I could into secure accounts he couldn't access. My friends at the hospital proved invaluable allies, helping me secure a new living arrangement and offering emotional support during those long, sleepless nights. I'd worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let Roy's deception derail my career or my financial security. With each passing day, the deception weighed more heavily on my conscience, but I refused to falter, drawing strength from the memories of the life Roy and I had built together, a life he had so callously discarded for his own selfish desires. Finally, the perfect opportunity presented itself. Roy announced he would be volunteering for a long weekend, no doubt squandering our hard-earned money on another lavish rendezvous with his mistress. As I wished him a safe trip, feigning cheerful ignorance, a surge of adrenaline coursed through my veins. This was it, the moment I had been meticulously preparing for. The second Roy's car pulled out of the driveway, Patricia and I sprang into action. We worked with military precision, swiftly packing the essentials and loading them into her car. Every box, every bag represented another piece of my life being reclaimed from the wreckage of Roy's betrayal. With the practical matters handled, I turned my attention to the emotional side of my grand exit. I gathered Roy's most prized possessions. The vintage watch I'd gifted him on our 25th anniversary, the framed photos from our dream vacation in Italy, even his beloved recliner, and arranged them in the center of the living room. Then I laid out the evidence of his infidelity, bank statements, phone records, and most damningly, the incriminating photos of him with his mistress. I wanted him to see, with crystal clarity, the depth of his transgressions laid bare before him. Finally, I penned a letter, pouring out my anguish and my resolve in equal measure. Roy, I wrote, my hand trembling with a potent mix of sorrow and rage. For over 40 years, I gave you everything, my love, my loyalty, my unwavering support, and you repaid me with deceit and disrespect, shattering the sacred vows we made before God. I took a deep, steadying breath, steeling my nerves for the words that would sever our once unbreakable bond. I deserve better than to be cast aside like an old, worn-out relic. I deserve a partner who cherishes me, who values the life we built together. Clearly, you are no longer that man. So I'm leaving, Roy, leaving you to the wreckage of your own making. Don't try to find me. Just know that you brought this upon yourself and upon us." With those parting words, I sealed the letter, placing it atop the stack of evidence like a damning verdict. My message was clear. The jig was up, and there would be no second chances. Hand in hand with Patricia, I took one last look around the home that had once represented my hopes and dreams. Then, with my head held high and my spirit fortified by an unshakable resolve, I walked out the door, slamming it shut on that chapter of my life once and for all. The calm before the storm had passed. Now the real battle was about to begin. The day had finally arrived, the day I would sever ties with Roy and reclaim my life once and for all. As he prepared to leave for his supposed volunteer weekend, I fought to maintain my composure, greeting him with a warm smile that betrayed none of the turmoil churning within me. "Have a great trip," I said, pressing a tender kiss to his cheek. "I'll miss you, but I know how important this work is to you." Roy beamed, completely oblivious to the fact that his world was about to come crashing down around him. "I'll be back before you know it, dear. Love you." With those parting words, he was gone, driving off to pursue his sordid affair while I put the final phases of my plan into motion. The second his car disappeared from sight, Patricia arrived, her face set in a determined expression that matched my own resolve. "Ready, sis?" she asked, pulling up to the curb. I nodded, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "More than ready. Let's do this." We worked with machine-like efficiency, swiftly loading every essential item into Patricia's car: clothes, personal mementos, important documents. With each box I carried out of that house, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders, as if I were shedding the shackles of Roy's deception one by one. As we stripped the home bare, I couldn't help but reflect on the decades of memories contained within those walls. The joyous celebrations, the hard-won triumphs, the quiet moments of domestic bliss. So much of my life had been interwoven with Roy's, and now I was cutting those threads forever. But rather than despair, I found strength in those recollections. They reminded me of the woman I had been before Roy's betrayal, strong, resilient, devoted. I had built this life from the ground up, and I would be damned if I let him take that away from me. With the practical matters handled, I turned my attention to one final, deeply symbolic act. I gathered Roy's most prized possessions, the ones that had once held such sentimental value, and arranged them in the center of our now barren living room. The vintage watch, the framed photos, the well-worn recliner, all laid out like an effigy of the life we had once shared. Atop that pile, I placed the evidence of his transgressions: bank statements, phone records, and those damning photos that had set this entire upheaval in motion. I wanted him to see, in no uncertain terms, the depth of his betrayal and the price he would pay for it. Finally, I penned a letter, pouring out my anguish and my resolve in equal measure. "You made your choices, Roy," I wrote, my hand trembling with a potent mix of heartache and rage. "And now you'll have to live with the consequences." With those parting words, I sealed the envelope, placing it atop the stack of evidence like a damning verdict. My message was clear. Our marriage was over, and there would be no second chances. Hand in hand with Patricia, I took one last look around the hollow shell that had once been my home. Then, with my head held high and my spirit fortified by an unshakable resolve, I walked out that door, slamming it shut on that chapter of my life once and for all. In that moment, I felt a surge of power and liberation unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Roy might have thought he could discard me like an old, worn-out relic, but he was gravely mistaken. I was just getting started. When Roy returned home from his supposed volunteer trip that weekend, I can only imagine the shock and confusion that must have washed over him. As he pulled into the driveway, the house appeared perfectly normal from the outside. But the moment he stepped through the front door, his world came crashing down around him. The home we had shared for decades was stripped bare, every trace of my existence carefully removed. In the center of the barren living room lay a tableau that must have chilled him to the bone, his most prized possessions arranged like an effigy, topped with the damning evidence of his infidelity. Bank statements, phone records, and those incriminating photos of him and his mistress, Lisa, stared back at him like a lurid accusation. And there, atop the pile, was my letter, a final, devastating proclamation that our marriage was over for good. I can only imagine the panic that must have seized him in those first few moments, the desperate confusion as he tried to make sense of the situation. His frantic calls to my phone went unanswered, of course, only adding to his growing desperation. Perhaps he thought I would eventually come to my senses, that this was all some elaborate misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with pretty words and empty promises. But as the hours ticked by and the reality of my absence sank in, the true weight of my actions must have hit him like a ton of bricks. Not only had I left him, but I had done so with a meticulous strategic precision that left him utterly powerless. The realization that I had been quietly gathering evidence and making preparations right under his nose, well, that had to sting in a way few betrayals could. In his desperation, I'm sure Roy reached out to Lisa, the woman for whom he had so callously discarded our marriage. But she, too, had faced the fallout of my carefully orchestrated revenge. With the evidence of their affair laid bare, her own life had been thrown into turmoil, thus leaving Roy well and truly alone to contend with the consequences of his actions. As the hours stretched into days, the isolation and shame must have weighed heavily upon him. This was no longer just a matter of a broken marriage. This was a personal hell of his own making, a purgatory crafted by the very woman he had so grievously underestimated. With each passing moment, I imagine Roy's mind replaying every interaction, every lie, every deception that had led to this moment. The years of memories we had shared, the life we had built together, all tainted by the bitter truth of his betrayal. And through it all, the damning evidence of his misdeeds stared back at him, a constant reminder of the price he had paid for his indiscretions. My letter, that final proclamation of freedom and resolve, must have felt like a dagger to his heart, twisting with every rereading. "You made your choices, Roy," I had written, my words carrying the weight of a life's worth of pain and disappointment. "And now you'll have to live with the consequences." For a man who had once held such power and control, the utter helplessness of his situation must have been a bitter pill to swallow. He had gambled everything on his ability to deceive me, and in the end, he had lost it all: his marriage, his dignity, and any semblance of the life he had once known. As for me, well, I had emerged from the ashes of our broken union like a phoenix reborn, stronger and more resilient than ever before. Roy's world might have been crumbling around him, but mine was just beginning anew, a life free from the shackles of his lies, a future forged on my own terms. And if he thought this was the end, that I would simply fade away into obscurity, well, he was about to learn just how mistaken he truly was. In the aftermath of my daring escape from Roy's web of lies, Patricia became my rock, my safe harbor in the storm. With a heavy heart, but an indomitable spirit, I moved in with her temporarily as I set about rebuilding my life from the ashes of our shattered marriage. Those first few nights, as the weight of everything I had endured came crashing down around me, Patricia and I would stay up late into the evening, sharing stories and shedding tears of both sorrow and relief. She had been my co-conspirator, my partner in crime, and now she was my shoulder to lean on as I navigated this new, uncertain path. "I'm so proud of you, sis," she would say, squeezing my hand reassuringly. "Roy never deserved a woman as strong and resilient as you." Her words, though simple, carried a profound weight, reminding me of the unbreakable bond we shared as sisters, a bond that had seen us through countless trials and tribulations over the years. We might have been separated by a few years in age, but in that moment, we were united as true equals, warriors who had stared down adversity and emerged victorious. As the days turned to weeks, Patricia and I began the process of finding me a new home, a sanctuary where I could start fresh, free from the ghosts of Roy's betrayal. We scoured listings, attended open houses, and eventually we found the perfect place, a cozy little bungalow with a beautiful garden out back, just waiting to be brought back to life. Moving into that new space, I felt a profound sense of rebirth wash over me. These walls held no echoes of the past, no lingering memories of the life I had once shared with Roy. This was my clean slate, my chance to redefine myself on my own terms. Slowly but surely, I began settling into a new routine, balancing my work at the hospital with the task of turning my house into a home. With each personal touch I added, each cherished memento I unpacked, I felt a little more of the weight lifting from my shoulders. My friends from work rallied around me, offering support and understanding in a way only those who had witnessed my turmoil could. They celebrated my newfound freedom, marveling at the strength it must have taken to orchestrate such a daring escape. And then there was Martha. My beautiful, resilient daughter had been kept largely in the dark about the true depths of Roy's deception, but when she learned the truth, she didn't hesitate to throw her support behind me wholeheartedly. "Mom, I'm just so sorry you had to go through all that," she said, tears shining in her eyes as we embraced. "But I'm in awe of your courage and your strength. You're an inspiration." Her words, spoken with such pure admiration and love, were like a soothing balm on the still raw wounds of my heart. In that moment, I realized that while Roy might have shattered our family's foundation, the bonds that truly mattered, the ones between mother and daughter, sister and sister, remained unbroken, fortified by a love and respect that transcended any one person's actions. As the weeks turned to months, I found myself settling into a new normal, one defined not by the shackles of Roy's betrayal, but by the empowering freedom of choosing my own path. Each morning I would wake up in my little bungalow, surrounded by the reminders of the life I had so bravely claimed for myself, and I would feel a surge of pride and contentment. This was my life now, a life forged in the fires of heartbreak and deception, but ultimately tempered into something stronger, more resilient, and more authentically mine than ever before. Roy might have thought he could break me, but in the end, he had only succeeded in unlocking a wellspring of inner strength I never knew I possessed. And as I looked ahead to the future, I did so with a renewed sense of purpose and a profound gratitude for the incredible network of women who had rallied around me. My sister, my daughter, my friends. Their love and support had been the light that guided me through my darkest days, and it was that same light that would continue to illuminate my path forward, come what may.